Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay.
মিলন না আমার কথা শোনা যাচ্ছে?
Yeah. Obradita, you
Yes, sir,
are
you are.
audible. You are
Yeah.
audible.
So once you just about to start, please let me know. I'll start the recording. Okay. Will take
Okay,
about
okay.
30 seconds.
Okay. Okay, Pradipta, please start recording. Professor Devroy, please start. Professor Devroy, are you getting me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, we are back again after a couple of hours of break in between the two lectures. And this is the second brainstorming that we are looking forward to. So I would request Professor Milan Mondol to please continue with the introduction of our respective speakers.
Okay, good evening to all of you once again. And today we have with us Ranjan Ghosh, Department of English. The University of North Bengal is a leading thinker of our generation writing from India, whose work spans across a wide range of subjects that includes critical theory, comparative philosophy and aesthetics, educational philosophy, history, secular and political studies, eco-criticism, etc. Among his last 15 books and close to 100 papers include Presence, Cornell University Press, 2013, with Ethan Kleinberg, Thinking Literature Across Continent with J. Hills Miller, Duke University Press, 2016, Philosophy and Poetry, Continental Perspective, Columbia University Press, 2019. The Plastic Turn in Diacritics, 2021. Desiring Material, Plastic Art and Effectability, the Minnesota Review, Plastic Literature, University of Toronto Quarterly, and Plastic Controversy in Critical Inquiries blog. Books titled Plastic Figures, Plastic Tagore, Thinking After Yesterday, Figuring Transhistoricality with Ethan Kleinberg, and Fragile Reading are coming out next year. For more on Ghosh, please look up his website www.ranjanghosh.com. So we are very proud to have you, sir, here. Over to you, sir. Now the podium is all for yours. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. But is it that my connectivity is okay, or should I reconnect again? Do you think I should reconnect, or can you hear me clearly?
Okay, okay. Yes,
No,
sir.
I think we can hear you. Yes.
Oh, I'm clear. That's
Yeah,
important. Yes.
absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you very much. I thank everyone here who has invited me, and of course Milan Mandal, who has always been very warm, very forthcoming with whatever queries I had, and we have been having rather a very series of communications over leading up to this talk. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here, and I do think that this is a kind of a platform which I thought can be a good place to begin, or rather talk about my next book. And my next book is obviously on it's called The Plastic Term, and since I've been researching on plastic for the last 3 or 4 years now, and it's continuing still and continuing heavily still. But this lecture is something that I want to focus on a rock. Now, this obviously forms a very generous excerpt from the book. This whole lecture is a kind of a generous excerpt from the book. But let me try to give you, in this talk, in the next 1 hour, just a few dimensions of how I have started to think about plastic and rock, and how this plastic, when it gets into a rock, what happens to our very effective relationship, our existential effective, at the same time, I think our imaginative relationship with a particular rock. Because if one really has to look into a rock, then the rock generally has to be like the igneous or the sedimentary or basaltic. But here is something that is quite different, in the sense that it is addressing us in a very different way. It's addressing us with a different tenor. It's addressing us with a different address, and obviously with a difference in effectability. So on that note, let me begin, because I was just reading out from a text, and the text obviously is from my manuscript. But in due course, I will be just showing you one picture of the plastic rock, which is called Plastigomerit. I'll come to that point later. And then, of course, I will ask someone to share that image on the screen for the audience. I will come to that when I reach that point. So, in June 1833, Charles Darwin requested the captain of HMS Beagle, the name of the ship, to delay his departure from Tierra del Fuego, because a strange group of granite boulders has stirred his investigative and imaginative energy. So Darwin writes that one of these, shaped somewhat like a burn, was 47 feet in circumference and projected 5 feet above the sand beach. Now, in his accounts of the voyage of HMS Beagle, Darwin described crystalline boulders of notable size and abundance near Bahia San Sebastian, south of the Strait of Magellan in Tierra del Fuego. So he's very enamored. He is actually, in a way you can call it, he was bemusingly exhilarated by the whole group of granite boulders that Darwin could see. Now, influenced by geologist Charles Lyell's reflections upon slow vertical movements of crust, submergence and ice rafting to explain drift, Darwin proposed that the boulders of Bahia San Sebastian were ice rafted. Darwin was inquisitive about the shape of the granite boulders and couldn't understand what could have got them there. So his intense interest in granite claims an involvement in both geological and romantic imagination. I call this the surprise, because for the first time Darwin gets to see this, and Darwin encounters a surprise. I'm emphasizing these words as I move through my discussion of Darwin, and obviously with Goethe. When I move through my discussions, I will be emphasizing there are 4 terms. I'm going to be emphasizing this 4 terms for you, so that I connect it with the Plastigomerit or the plastic rocks when I come to it. If Darwin is looking at granite, what are we looking at? That's the argument I'm going to come to. So that's the first thing, that is the surprise. Now, those were called Darwin boulders, and Darwin boulders are said to be erratic, enigmatic, speculative, and romantic. Now, Darwin attributed these granites to the erratic to ice rafting. And he points out that the boulders could have been transported by floating ice, but the enormity and the certain kind of strangeness added to the wild beauty possessed this post-Lyell geological temper and imagination. And this is what I call bizarre, because Darwin is not only looking at with surprise, but he just cannot understand, even though he was heavily influenced by this geologist, Charles Lyell, he still couldn't understand that how these huge granite boulders could fit into his geological temper and geological imagination. As all of you know, he was not just a botanist or zoologist, he was a geologist as well. So the bizarre is another word that one should know now as I move through this talk. Now, granite, as you know, has a very complicated formations. I mean, let me talk about my researches in geology a little, because that's and that makes this piece more interesting, because after all, we're talking about a rock. There will be a good many references to geology here in this conversation. So granite has its own complicated formations, unstable and not simple in its petrological origin. So this petrological origin of the granite during that time, in Darwin's time, since it had its own enigma, it had its own bizarreness, and it had its own surprise, it was also called a granite controversy. So it is a granite controversy. So I'll come to connect this with plastic controversy later. So it's the granite controversy that one gets in. So what is happening to this petrological origin, or this petrological formation of granite? That is, it consists of known materials, yet combined in a secret manner. It is impossible to determine whether its origin is from fire or water. Extremely variable in the greatest simplicity, its mixture presents innumerable combinations. Please note this, I'm quoting from Darwin, but these are very important lines for me to connect later when I talk about the plastic rock or plastic hybrid rock, or what you call plasticomerit. So what does Darwin say? Darwin says it consists of known materials, yet combined in a secret manner. It is impossible to determine whether its origin is from fire or water. Extremely variable in the greatest simplicity, its mixture presents innumerable combinations. This is what I call here becoming. So first I mentioned this surprise, then I mentioned underlying the term bizarre, and now I'm emphasizing the term becoming. So this granite genesis, it has a very competing explanations primarily about how it starts to form itself. So its petrological process, its petrological formation, it's something that one gets to know, and at the same time, there are certain elements in this formation which remains a bit unknown. So even Darwin reflects on the inconclusiveness and by extension, the processuality of the granite when he questions. He puts up this question, depths of a profound ocean. He asks the question, did a covering of strata for an extent which has since removed short of infinity could have denuded the granite over so many thousand square leagues? So he's asking lots of questions here. So, and questions which don't get very determinate answers. So it is in that all the formations we find metaphoric force, tectonic variety, chance, actional compatibility, all coming together. Into this complexity of emergence when one reread. But when one delivers a talk, what happens? There are certain very important sentences, or probably which starts to connect you in a major way with the pith of your work, it's important that I repeat certain sentences for you so that you can prompt with this lecture better. So I read this sentence again. I say, it is imagination that enforces tectonic variety, chance, actional consequences, and unpredictability come into a complexity of emergence. So all these factors that come into production of the granite. So if one just reads in a granite, of course, this very geological scientific tradition of what you call the granite controversy. Goethe also has an essay which he wrote, and that speaks about the antiquity of Earth and a near unfathomable processual build-up within the Earth's precisely geological certain events, but there are certain events which I cannot explain. So there is somewhere a kind of a hiatus in my cognition. There is a kind of interruption in my ways of understanding the very event. So there is a processual build-up within the Earth's crust, the romantic and scientific imagination, which I would call it the becoming Earth. That's the way it works, the becoming Earth. Now he observes that composed of familiar materials formed in mysterious ways. It's a term that Goethe uses. He is composed of familiar materials formed in mysterious ways. Its origins are as little to be found in fire as they are in water. Extremely diverse in greatest simplicity, its mixtures are compounded in numberless variety. Granite has its own mix of quartz, feldspar, mica, and Goethe, in his essay called On Geology, particularly the Bohemian, tries to analyze the mysterious trinity of this quartz, feldspar, and mica. So granite, it's in a way becomes almost like the botanical studies that Goethe conducted, where he seeks the form of the Urs plants, that is the ultimate plant, the plant that is the original plant, that it contained the Urs plants that is contained in each plant today. His geological explanation also focuses primarily on the processes of development. So granite is the metaphor for and the physical embodiment of the ageless laws of mineral formations. Now, there are two things that I just wanted to tell you. One was that I'm keeping it short because there are other descriptions of Goethe's interaction with the stone and what are the interesting, the petrochemical, imaginative, affective complexes that come out of this. But that is not the real crux of this talk because I have to keep it within 1 hour or maximum 70 minutes. Here, these are the two rocks that one describes. That is one that Goethe describes and the other Darwin describes. And in both the description, what we get is that there is a formation, there is a mystery, there are lots of things that come together in the formation of the granite. At the same time, the granite has this ability to give you a scientific fillip, probably a scientific peg or a trigger for which you can go and investigate and come to certain determined deductive conclusions. But at the same time, you can also look at it in a romantic way, romantic in a sense of unfamiliar way, unfamiliar in the sense of an uncanny way, uncanny in the sense of probably a mysterious way. Now, this is where the granite has its own, you can call it ontic or ontological problematic build. Now, when you compare this today, what we are doing now, the fascination and fetish, the imagination and indignation today is with plastic. And an aggrieved and aggressive turn to plastic has brought us not before granite anymore, or Darwin's boulders anymore, but a strange petrochem in plasticomanity. This is I call it the strange petrochem. That is somebody who is, if granite's little cousin there, and this cousin can be called plasticomanity. So it's a mixture of plastic intermateriality and I come back to those terms that I use, plastic emerald, now when you see it, is surprising, bizarre, becoming erotic, aberrant, and like granite, it is the plastic controversy. I would request Professor Mundal to share that image which I sent to you, so that people can connect with what I'm saying and what
Oh yeah,
exactly is
yeah.
the plastic emerald.
Yes, sure, sir. Professor Goswami, please share the screen. Professor Goswami, are you getting me?
Yeah, as you can see this, yes, exactly. If you see this, this is the rock. And if you see this rock, you will see that there is that orange colored nylon rope that really just traverses the face of the rock. And when you see those, the blue colored pieces, those are plastic pellets that has got stuck into the rock. So it doesn't really look like a rock at this moment. It looks like that there are plastic elements that have gone into it, which is the reason why I'm telling you the plastic intermateriality, because you get nylon ropes there, you get many different kinds of plastic material which you cannot take out of the rock because they have been indurated. They were completely interred into the rocks. So they are so much into the rocks that you cannot take it out. But this rock has a fascinating look. If you see, if you look at this rock, this is being displayed in one of the museums in Canada. So if you look at this rock, you would see that it is a fascinating way of looking at it, because that's not exactly what a stone looks like. So, you know, this plastic stone or this plastic rock, it has this hybrid sort of you can call it a hybrid sort of an impression and appearance. Now, keep this image in mind, because my whole presentation is about addressing this rock. There are other plastic emeralds which I could have shown you. There are many other plastic emeralds there which were discovered, but this is one I found fascinating, because this is where it really shows how this nylon rope actually went through the face, almost the middle of this rock structure, and giving it almost a fascinating look. So keep this in mind as I come back to the talk. Thank you for sharing. We might need this image later when I come back to discuss it. So this is a mixture of plastic intermateriality, and as I said, there are many things that are coming to your mind. It's like you're surprised, you find it bizarre because you haven't seen anything like this ever. Then it is a becoming, because there are so many things that the rock produces. I mean, this is not the kind of rock that you get to see if you geologically open up the earth. This is a rock that starts to build on its own. There is something that this rock has, or you can call the subjectivity of the rock, that starts to build something about its own. It was not something that humans really engineered. Other than that, the nylon is something that the humans use, or the various plastic pellets and pops and containers. That's what the humans use. But how they got into the rock is something that the human did not engineer. So is there an earth engineer working? Is there something other than human that is working? Probably that is the mysterious part about looking at this rock. And probably that is the mysterious part about plastic growing like another creature around us. We will come to this as I move through. So this term plastic emerald has been used because it's like plastic and you say conglomerate. So conglomerate means things that come together, and plastic. So they coined the term as called plastic emerald. And when they use the term plastic emerald, they talk about this indurated multi-composite material made hard by agglutinization of rock and molten plastic. So this material that you can see here, I'm talking a little geologically because the geologist would like to talk to you about this. This material is subdivided into an in situ type, in which plastic is adhered to rock outcrops, and a clastic type of rock, in which combination of basalt, coal, shells, and local woody debris are cemented with grains of sand in a kind of plastic matrix. Now, interestingly, both granite and plastic emeralds here, I'm just bringing these two two rocks to show how we have made a transition into our plastic age, and how this transition into the plastic age, or how our turn to the plastic has come through. I'm just going to show this through these rocks here. So that granite and plastic emerites are deeply embedded in their own way. As Darwin said, that I don't know how these things happen, where there is so much of feldspar and mica coming in and basalt coming in to really produce this mica. I don't know how this granite formed. In a similar way, we also don't know how this plastic emerites actually suddenly emerged out of this earth, and whether this earth is in a state of becoming, as I said, that the becoming earth. So the plastic, with time, plastic rolled out into a reason to live by. Before long, it was in the realm of imagination again. And plastic started to get, when it was discovered, in the 1910s and the 1920s, when plastic was discovered, it had a presence. Once it was rolled out of the laboratory, it had a presence outside. And our life was actually lived by plastic. We lived in plastic. We lived through plastic. But you know what happened? Once we started to decide that this plastic is plastic something that cannot be reused, then the whole idea of the throwaway plastic started to grow. And this cult of discardism reached at a point where you suddenly started moving out of plastic for the newer ones. And what happened to those old ones were that they actually got invisible. And what this invisibility lent to those plastic was that they got master crafty. When I say master crafty, you know, they started moving into a rock, and so it became plastic emerald. Then they started moving into the stomach of the birds, like you see that famous picture of the plastic belly of the albatross bird. It starts to peck on plastic pellets and pelagic plastics there in the sea. So that's where it starts to ingress into. And this plastic also has its stealth and power to get into our very own system, as our body starts now to become plastic bodies. So, you know, granite and plastic emeralds, they are deeply embedded in their own way. And I call this, the first one, the poesis in petrology. And the second one, I call it the poesis in petrochemicality. So plastic emerald today, like Darwin's and granites and Goethe's granites, they comes through as a romantic rock. As you can see that, it's a kind of romantic rock. It's a shocking rock to see, because you can see the reflection of the crisis of human civilization there, the crisis of biotic life there, as you can see in that plastic rock. But in spite of that, I say it's a romantic rock. You can just about add something to say it's a romantic Gothic rock there that you can see, which is a speculative rock, which is a spectacular rock, but it has a very distinct geological aesthetic. Now, plastic emerald, let me tell you a little about this rock so that you start to find more interest in what this rock is doing. Before I start to talk to this rock, I haven't started talking to this rock, but I will begin after I've actually explained to you what the plastic emerald is doing here and how it was discovered. So plastic emerald was discovered in 2006 by Charles Moore, a sea captain and an oceanographer at the Algalita Marine Research Institute in Long Beach, California. Mr. Moore was surveying plastic washed up on the Camilo Beach, a remote polluted stretch of sand on Hawaii's Big Island. And like other southeastern shores in the Hawaiian archipelago, the Camilo Beach accumulates garbage because of how currents circulate. Spotting the odd plastic-covered rock assemblages, Mr. Moore took a few photographs and collected some specimens. The significance of the discovery was not realized until 2012, when Patricia Corcoran, an earth scientist at the Western University in Ontario, invited Mr. Moore to give a lecture about plastic pollution. He included the plastic conglomerates in one of his slides, although he had no name for them. Intrigued to fly to Hawaii to see the strange anthropogenic stones for herself. At Camilo Beach, she and a colleague sampled 21 sites on a 2,300-foot strip. They collected all plastic rock specimens with a diameter of about an inch or more, but most of the melted plastic was hard to identify, but traces of nets, ropes, and lids appeared in some stones. They collected 205 pieces ranging from the size of a peach pit to a diameter of a large pizza. So that was the huge one that they got. And what did they get there? Conqueror and Moore admit that the plastic melt beyond recognition. That's what, when you saw this image, which I'm going to come back to again, that is, that when you saw that image, you will see that the plastic melts beyond recognition in some plastic amarites. And in some, it is visible and recognizable as the one that you saw. There is that rope. So there is a netting rope, the pellets, the partial containers and packaging. You also saw the lids there. You saw the tubes and the pipes, and also the blue color one were probably confettis. So those were all, they were deeply embedded, deeply ingrained in the rock, and it becomes very much a part of the rock. So these are the embrittled remains in the form of containers and lids, ropes, nylon fishing, and parts of oyster spacer tubes. So if granite grew out of a blend of quartz, feldspar, and mica, as I was discussing that when I was talking with you about Goethe and Darwin, building on its own mineralization with certainty, some kind of certainty and mystery, the materials identified in the formation of the plastic amarite, it speaks of a larger story of civilization and its discontents, and of a thinly veiled dystopic controversy, and what we might call the kind of junkyard Frankenstein. So this is the junkyard Frankenstein that we are gradually getting into. So, and this is the kind of plastic amarite that we have before us. Now we have described the rock, given some kind of a genealogy of its growth, given you some kind of image and idea about what exactly is a plastic amarite and what kind of things does a plastic amarite do. Now begins the way we talk to the plastic amarite. As more than 70% of the plastic production get into the modern landfill, current trends shows that we actually put 12 billion tons of waste into the earth by 2050. Not to forget, 12 billion tons of plastic waste we are putting into by 2050. We are helplessly in the face of a changing art content. And what becomes interesting here is that this leachate, what you are doing, if plastic is made to sieve through the remotest non-human corners of this planet, because plastic is going everywhere. I mean, if the most non-human part of this planet is also being infested and besetted by plastic, which is the reason why the albatross are getting extinct, because the birds are picking on, or birds are foraging on the plastic pellets. So if plastic is meant to sieve through the remotest non-human corners of this planet, the subterranean infiltration is no less emphatic. I call this, in this book, the plastiturbation. I use the term called plastiturbation. Now, within this anthropogenic morphostratigraphy, we have human inputs influencing sedimentation and the lithoscape, that is the soil structure, that is getting influenced. Now, with plastic amarites and other forms of plastic petrification, plastic geology now becomes our speculative thought. We didn't have this sort of a science growing, but as I researched into it, I realized that plastic geology is something that I can propose as a new trend that is developing in our environmental studies. So plastic amarite makes us look into our time. This very rock, when I'm talking to this rock, it helps me to look into our time, where reading about the earth is reading about history and cultural narrative, whose point of emergence and inception stay niched in the first decade of the 20th century, as I said, 1910 and 20s. But this is the geological line as a part of what you call the chaos. There is a multi-layered dialectic comprising of flora and fauna. But gradually, it starts to territorialize the earth with clear indicators of two things. One is the pre-plastic geomorphology. That's what I call it, the pre-plastic geomorphology. And the second one is the post-plastic geomorphology. So there are two different morphologies as you start to look into the whole idea of the poetics and the geosense of the earth that we live in. Now, does that bring a kind of bewitchment? Is it bringing a sort of a bewitchment in you, in a sense that you're bewitched by this whole rock that you saw right now? Is it that this rock really gives you only an ordinary sense of familiarity with something that you've seen in the past? Or is there a kind of a bewitchment of rationalism that you start to encounter? That's the way you are trying to dialogue with this rock here. So this bewitchment of rationalism, as it works very differently in plastic America, where suddenly we start to see the earth as a collector. The earth is an assimilator. The earth is a networker. Forget the human. I will come to the whole fact about how for me the turn to plastic, how for me the plastic turn has resulted in the death of the human. That's a very different way. Now, don't get into Burke or your Derrida. I will have my own thesis to tell you that how our turn to plastic has been a complete, a different sense of the death of the human being born into someone else. It is not the death of the human, but the rebirth of the human. How that happens, I'm going to tell you a little later. So what is happening to this earth here is that the earth has become a collector. The earth has become an assimilator. The earth become a networker. Now, this is about fabricating its own identity in a surreal geoscape. You have a very surreal geoscape coming. So in a different kind of art, where one art can be where I have worked extensively with artists in my book, and of course in my forthcoming work I'm working with international artists who work with this plastic material. But that's a plastic art which talks about, if at all it can be called a plastic art, because of course it means something different, but art that is being done through with plastic material. This is a very different kind of art which has a sort of anthropogenic subjectivity to it. But here is a different kind of art that the earth creates. The earth is creating a different kind of art where objects disappear, the nylon rope disappeared, those confetti and plastic pellets and containers or the lids, they were, but this suddenly resurfaced from the completely different geosense. I call this word geosense. It's just not, it's a different kind of a term. There are terms that I've used here. I've introduced many different terms here in this book. I could explain once if you have your questions later. So what it does here is that it has a new form of georeality, and this georeality suspends human rationality, if not scientific explanation. Scientific explanation is there, which is why I explained that to you, that how the plastic America emerged. But it has suspended our human rationality, which is why I say it's the bewitchment of rationalism. That's the reason why I'm telling this. And once this kind of a bewitchment of rationalism comes with a different geosense, this particular rock creates a fresh historical narrative. Now, this is a different kind of desire. Well, this is where you start to get into this philosophy of desire. But I'm not moving here into Freud or Lacan, but or for Irigaray and the rest of the French continental thinking that comes with the traditional desire. But I'm just going to mention here that this is a new kind of geo-desire. I call it the geo-desire, which leaves human subjectivity under suspension. There is no human working to build this rock. That doesn't work at all. You find human material there. The rock is being built with human material, but the rock has not been engineered and constructed by a human. That is where the real bizarreness, that is where the real critical thinking emerges. That you have your own material in it, but you don't have a voice, you don't have a hand in its construction. That is the interesting part. So I can put it this way, that I am actually living with the images that I interact with this world. But when the artwork is created, I do not have any voice or authority in its build, in its construction or its built up. So this is the way of putting the plastic emerald as both irrational, maybe that's the way you can put it, and you can also call it surrational. So it is both irrational and surrational, and interestingly, the earth starts to surprise you. The earth is surprising you, and this earth through the rock ungrounds itself. So the earth is never a solid ground that we thought it has been. The earth is very liquid in nature now. So the earth, as the plastic emeralds have tempted us to say, keeps transcending its status, topologies, its depths of geoaesthetical expressions. And plastic stirs, and the earth stirs the plastic. So immediately the human is missing there. The earth stirs the plastic, and the plastic stirs the earth. And in this fluidity of negotiation, in this fluidity of a dialogue, both address potentiation and possibilities. Earth and plastic, both are suggesting potentiation and possibilities, and they are inventing topologies and delivering freedom of expression. So what is this earth? This earth is a becoming earth where productivity precedes product. This earth is a becoming earth where productivity precedes product. So here we encounter, even if you go to the German romantic philosophy and you look into that tradition, you can see that here we are getting into a transcendental geology. And a transcendental geology where the ground has always been a dynamical ungrounding. The ground has always been a dynamical ungrounding, and we are left to question the rock. How do we question the rock now? What legacy will human leave in these rocks? Plastic petrifaction? As one of the major perturbation events, the culture of plastic will lie in the earth crust, waiting to be deciphered. Overlaid, stratified, rarefied, this plastic projects an idea of an impossible time, the levels that are unrecognizable, intuitive, and deep. Now, I call this the term that I use here in this book. I'm keeping it short. Of course, I'm leaving few things for you people interested after hearing this talk, probably, to pick the book up and read. I call this the plastic fossilization. I mean, there are different kinds of fossil science that goes on. Fossilization is being done where you call it hardware fossilization, or just for calling it the telefossilization. I call this the plastic fossilization, where there is a relentless and inexorable process that recharacterizes an already unstable earth. And an earth that is a compilation machine, as assembly line, where trash, construction debris, coal ash, dredge sediments, petroleum contamination, green lawns, decomposing bodies, and rock ballast not only alter the formation of the soil, but themselves form soil bodies, and in this respect are taxonomically indistinguishable from soil. Now, the seeping and sedimenting plastic, as you can see, the way Nile and rock gets inside the earth and gets into the rock, this seeping and sedimenting plastic, it starts to change the soil character and habit. I call it the plasticization of the soil ego. There is a plasticization of the soil ego takes place, where you start to create a deterritorialized earth that is weighed down by irrevocable plastic sink. And importantly, this paleo futures, the way Jasparica looks at it, the paleo futures, I call it the plastic of futures. This plastic agency changes our understanding of relational materialism and the non-humanization of the living and ethical ego. I repeat this. This plastic agency here changes our understanding of relational materialism and the non-humanization of the living and ethical ego. The plastic existence has brought us before post-environmentalism, encouraging more than human formations and chemomaterial initiations. Earth's deep time is increasingly invaded by what I call plastic time. There is a whole new understanding of the plastic time that I've introduced here in the book. Besides its non-plasticity and decay-resistant trajectory, this time, the plastic time, includes forces that are global, capitalist, economic, and political. Plastic changes the soil time, and the processes that make the earth crust chemicalize differently involve temporality of a different order, as soil organisms, including plants, face a separate regime of existence and expiry. In acts of rematerialization, we are confronted with a new geo-entanglement. Whether other forms of fossilization generate interest in the earth's depths, teleplastic fossilization has left us frozen in options. And why we are frozen? Because deposition is looked as a depravity, because discontinuity is looked at despair. So we are born into a plastic time. As we look at this rock, I mean, that's what comes to us, that we are born into a plastic time. It is the endless flow of time without decay, with a corresponding coordinate of time understood as advancement. Like we say, I am 40, so I reach 80. So that's the corresponding time that we call it the ordinary time with which we are familiar with. But there is another time that almost like a Heideggerian attunement starts to go along with you, which says the plastic time. So this accelerates the contraction of the biological time. Human time moves within the circumscription of plastic time now. But plastic time, in its immovability and universality, impacts on the human time, and hence is responsible for a flow outside itself. So plastic time is in a way impinging, impacting the human time, but at the same time, that is also outside the human time. Because the way we look at a human time, and we look at a human here, from where I'm talking at this moment in Siliguri, and where you people are listening to me across Bengal or maybe beyond Bengal, whoever is listening to me, if you ask what's the human time, what would be your biological time, and we'll say humans, they really live up to 80 years. I mean, if I'm living in Siliguri, I might live up to 80. If you're living in New York, you still be living up to 80 years. But what about a plastic time? Everyone is a victim of plastic, whether in New York or in Siliguri. But the plastic starts to move out of the human time to create a time for itself. Because a plastic pellet that's in New York might take around 500 years to finally biodegrade. And a plastic here in Siliguri might take 700 years to biodegrade. So they are not really corresponding with the biological time, which somehow has a uniformity in the way we understand durability or duration of a human life or any kind of animal life. This is the interesting part about the plastic time that I'm trying to theorize here. So Plastic America proclaims no abrupt collapse of time and historical distance in understanding, because it speaks of a trajectory of evolution in the last 60 years. Say, primarily the plastic pollution started to be felt in the last 60 to 70 years. That wedges the subject and the object. So object will be the plastic and me, the subject. Now, this is a very anti-romantic formulation in the reversal of subjectivity, where the object formation has its own precise scientific understanding and a clear heuristic discourse on the relational map with a transforming object. So once I'm a subject and I'm looking at the object, the object actually becomes a transforming object. And this object starts to have its own subjectivity like the plastic rock has. Because when I'm looking at the plastic rock and I disinter that plastic rock from the earth and put it there, right there on a museum piece where we can go and visit. Once you go to the museum and start to visit and see the plastic rock, the plastic America, what you see is that you look around for the artist. This is not Mopasa, this is not Matisse, this is not Avanindranath. You just go down and look at the artist, and the artist would be the earth. The artist would be nature. The artist would be something that is strictly non-human. So there is that anti-romantic formulation coming up, where the subjectivity is in a way decentered, where the subjectivity in a way is completely deinstitutionalized. And this is the complication that the plastic rock starts to do to you. So what happens is that we are getting into a plastic geolayering. This is the plastic geolayering, and it all has its own telematic genealogies. Oh, it's not a genealogy of morals, it's a genealogy of plastic here. And it is here that the complex parallelism is built between plastic materiality and biological plasticity, where running away from plastic is always already a running into plastic. Now, there is no way that you can run away from plastic. The more you run away from plastic, you are running into a different kind of plastic, because the plastic that you run away from is the plastic produced, which you could have used. And the plastic that you run away into is the discarded plastic that you thought could not be used anymore. So there is the plastic hardwaring of this earth. And this plastic hardwaring of this earth would have its vanishing points and expiry moments. This plastic hardwaring of this earth would have its own sustainability, points of sustainability, and composite fractures. Well, Siegfried Julensky's word I'm going to use here to say this is a kind of variantology. This is not ontology. This is not a way of you looking at the ontology, but it is a way of looking at variantology. So, interesting part about this plastic fossilization is that plastic fossilization mediated by the anthropos, the material habits and consumeration, and the global flow of trash and waste? This fossilization that I'm talking about, plastic fossilization, is a process, a fluidity that constructs the reality of man's performance in living, as well as his construction of an unknown future. If fuel fossils precede, plastic fossils follow. The whole question of temporality is under revision in that, while fossils represented a transition from a past into the present domain of human access and use, with plastic, it is the present that prepares a future whose appropriation and accommodation is difficult to envisage. So plastic fossilization is not mere plasticine. Like you say Anthropocene, you use the term plasticine. So plastic fossilization is not mere plasticine, but post-plasticism. That's a term, that's a philosophical concept that I'm introducing here, where I say plastic fossilization is not mere plasticine, but post-plasticism. A state of being with. This is a state of being with that is a cohabitability whose parameters will stretch everything. What? It will stretch biology, physiology, and the materiality of our existence, encircling both the human and the non-human order. So life forms will have a fresh lease of life structure. This is interesting. Life forms will have a fresh lease of life structure, both internally and externally, through post-plasticism. With plastic scripting invisibly in our own prints deep into the earth crust, what you call it in ecological philosophy, you call it the invasion ecology. The anarchology of differing manifestations is evident. Plastic produced is plastic distributed. Plastic transformed is plastic stored. And plastic disused is plastic born. I say plastic produced is plastic distributed, plastic transformed is plastic stored, and plastic disused is plastic born. So that's the first talking that we did. I kept it short here. I wanted to keep it short here with plastic fossilization. But the last part of the talk, I'm just going to take another probably maximum 10 minutes before I finish. Here is an interesting argument that another dialogue that you can have with this plastic rock, and this one I use the term plastic sublime. Now this is another concept that I'm introducing in this book alongside plastic fossilization, and that is plastic sublime. What is this plastic sublime? I mean, we have had a huge lot of literature and a copious amount of writings on sublime, but what is this plastic sublime? I'll keep it short before I end this. This is another dialogue that you start to have with this particular rock. Now, the plastic sense what the plastic sense is doing, that when you are looking at the rock, you are having a sense of the plastic. And there's a different kind of plastic. I mean, the one that I'm holding my phone here, that's a different sense of the plastic. But the plastic that I'm actually seeing there in the rock gives me a very different sense of plastic. And this plastic sense has a very different mathematics to it. And this, we should call that a new kind of matheme to it, or new mathematics to it, which is the incalculable, the differential, you have the equational, you have the relational. I mean, these I'm not going to detail out here, but these are there in the book. But there you have the incalculable, you have the differential, you have the equational, you have the relational. And these are the little mathematical coordinates that you start to build with the plastic. And this plastic sense is about inhabiting technology, where the sense of plastic is our sense of existence. We are in the reign of plastic technology that has redefined our eco-sensibilities at a point, or to a point, of changing our history and culture of sense. So a whole lot of the plastic's impact would be, looking at those raw, our whole culture, whole understanding of the sense is actually going to change as well. And what becomes important is that, do we in this way have a new plastic logos? Is it that there is a new plastic logos that comes into place? If it is, then this plastic logos is the legai that is the restless in this assemblage of a variety of forces and coordinates that are expressed in materialities, machine desires, thousand plateaus of economic commerce, and bodies in motion. So the plastic, the very other side of plastic logocentrism has its own algorithms, diagrammatic and calculative manifestations and expressions. It's a very different object. It's a very different event. It's a very different ceremony that the plastic does. It's a different personality that the plastic has. So it will have its own algorithms. It will have its own diagrammatic and calculative manifestations and expressions, and aesthetics of growth, capitalism, and dissemination. So sensing plastic, or plastic sense and plastic all come together in a very different kind of plastic pedagogy. These are all different terms that I'm using here. It's a little complicated here because I'm reading sections out of it. But once you read through the book, then these things obviously will unpack better on you. So sensing plastic, plastic sense and plastic all come together in a kind of plastic pedagogy. So one part that remains to be pointed out here before I actually start to talk to you about this Sublime is that we are in the midst of, I'm skipping Persians, but we are in the midst of eco art. We are in the midst of the earth art. That is where the art of the earth strikes you in an almost phenomenal way, in an overwhelming way, probably with a kind of, I would say, in a different kind of sublimity, which might not just be the mathematical or the dynamical sublime of Kant, but it should actually be a very different kind of sublime with which the plastic starts to open up on you. Now, what is that? That the plastic American, the rock that you are seeing here, this rock is both discrete and the rock is indiscrete. Both. It is very discrete because you know it's a rock. But if it's an indiscrete, you just can't imagine why this nylon rope is inside the rock. How did it get in? How did the nylon rope get into the rock? You don't know because you haven't seen that. The only thing that you can do is to do a kind of a geological speculation, probably do a kind of a geological, scientific, inductive way of explaining how that nylon rope might have got into it. But this conditional is important. This uncertainty is also very important. You just cannot put your finger here on my watch and say this is watch and this is not a chocolate. So that is what you can do, but here you simply cannot do that. So importantly, it is both an object that is discrete and at the same time an object that is it becomes a product of scientific investment and explorations. But if it's indiscreteness, it is coming from the objectification. Now, this objectification is a process. Now, this is a different kind of objectification, where the object gets into a process and starts to objectify itself. So objectification is looked at here as a kind of a process, and it invokes many things. It invokes delightful horror, as you can see the plastic American. It can evoke aesthetic dismay. And at the same time, I can use this term, it invokes hysterical sublime. There is a hysterical sublime that you start to see in that particular plastic America. So science lends knowledge of plastic, but just could not predict plastic America. So science, it makes what plastic America environmental without being scientifically natured or generated. This is an important part. Plastic America, you can see those scientifically generated objects inside the rock. There lies the paradox. There lies the critical controversy. There lies probably the critical thinking that one needs to get into. But you can see those humanly generated, scientifically generated, technologically produced elements getting into that particular rock. But what comes out through what I say, objectification, is something that remains indiscreet, that remains something that is environmental. So this is the different part about it. Now, Sandra Sapche has a very interesting way of putting two kinds of sublime, which I've brought in here, because in a general feeling would be that one gets into this, the tradition of the sublime, and you start to look at Kant and Bach, and of course, you're coming back from Longinus and all. But when you are actually proceeding in that, there are two kinds of sublime that comes into here. One is the thin sublime, and the other is the thick sublime. So there are two sublimes here. Now, the thin sublime, it emerges from sources that are physiological and transcendental, and they really owe to the allegiance of Edmund Burke or Kant. But this thin vein sublimity is a pre-theoretical form of appreciating nature. What is that? When caught up in such experiences during this sublime, I'm talking about the thin sublime, when you're caught up in experiences, your attention is fixed on a certain aspects of natural expanse rather than others. Like the palpable force of the cascade, as Kant would say, or the height or the volume of the water, or probably the intensity of the storm, and the way it alters the surrounding atmosphere. So you're looking at one aspect of the natural expanse, but you're not looking at others. Now, this does not require any special scientific knowledge, because if the storm is blowing, I mean, you don't have to be a weather expert, or you don't have to be a weatherman to really understand or appreciate the storm. The storm can have an impact on you without you actually knowing the scientific reasons for that. So scientific knowledge is not very essential to your understanding of the sublime when it talks about the thin one. Perhaps it only requires being human. You have to be human to really understand the sublime, and equipped with the senses we have, like being small and able to intuit the immense force relative to creatures like us, like the roaring tons of water. Now, that is being aroused emotionally by nature, and our arousal may be the function of our human nature in response to the natural expanse. So that's very human way of interacting with the sublime. But interestingly here, the plastic rock or the plastic America, it takes on the side of the sublime that is less environment and more object processed. The thick sublime, this is what with Sandra Sapche, I call it the thick sublime, where it calls on reason, rational explanation, and greater cognitive content. Look what plastic has been doing in such beautifully horrific way, which our knowledge imperceptibly, with such gradual lethal seepage and eventual toxicity. Look at the words I'm using here. I say this is a sublime. The plastic America, the plastic rock is a sublime. But what kind of sublime is that when you say it? Then you say, look at the mountains. They're so beautiful. They're overwhelmingly beautiful. When you say that, here you are saying something else. You are saying, look what the plastic has been doing in such beautifully horrific way, without our knowledge, imperceptibly, with such gradual lethal seepage and eventual toxicity. Well, this is not pain or exaltation that you need a Kant or a Schopenhauer to explain and paradigmatize. This is not a strict dialectical sublime, but a certain intensity of emotion that derives from the fragility and precarity of man's relation with nature. So it brings more idea and intellection into our understanding of object and object processuality, and is the process by which scientific cogniticism itself invites a certain attention to the framing subject. So what happens here is that a sublime earth event through the plastic emerald makes the aesthetic appreciator in you. There is a different kind of aesthetic appreciator that comes out of you. So you start to ask questions like, what could have got the toothbrush or maybe a nylon rope into that particular rock? You start asking questions. The surprise is coming from there. That is where the sublime is coming from. You are not asking, why is that there is a storm now? Why is it raining so hard? That is not where the sublime is coming from. When you're looking at, say, the Kantian or the Neo-Germanic tradition of looking at sublime, you are here asking questions to really reach at that sublime. And that is, how could a toothbrush or a nylon rope get into a particular rock? What force and instant synergized with the melting of the rock, the temperature gradient, the flow, the molecularity, the seepage, and the conjugation? What could have lent so many factors that went into doing it? As I said, when you're looking at the sublime in the traditional way, you're looking at one aspect. You're not looking at others that may come into it. But here, the others become very important. Again, I said being wet, that's become so important when one gets into this plastic sublime effect. So it is sublime that has found a place. How does the earth art back? This is a question one's asked now. This is a form of earth. This is a part of the earth because you took the rock out of the earth crust. So this is the part of the earth. So how is that the earth back? Earth in single quote. How does the earth back? And here earth art is a separate form of representation within the agency of earth as it appropriates the human for paleo-artistic or petri-artistic representations. There's a new ways of looking at this whole idea of this plastic rock now. So this plastic emerald is a kind of earth, plastic art, potentials in speed, scope, and scale of geospherical expression. The interlocking of the matter is unstable, unpredictable, and dynamic. If the plastic claims its way into the digestive system of a fish, like the fish ingesting plastic in the sea, and clanks out a space in the human body, it clings to the rocks to exquisitely exoteric forms. So the earth delivers the unknown, and plastic emerald in that sense is an unknown experience. I would have spoken, I can speak about different things when I take questions. I do know that there will be lots of questions coming up later, but to end this discussion, we can finally come to the part that as I finished writing this book, just like this is a part of the book, as I said. So when I finished writing this book, I from this writing this book from where I've been reading today, and also the kind of discussion that I'm making today, the world stands tormented by the COVID-19 virus. It still is, and the earth is not a virus. That would say the earth is not a virus that would settle into a cohabitative peace with the discovery of a vaccine. If a vaccine is discovered, the earth will settle in peace with the virus. No, that never happens. So the earth does not need to be thought of as all anthropogenically constructed and consequently dependent solely on human effort for survival and sustenance. No. If humans have actually, in a way, completely dominated, anthropogenically dominated this earth to say that we have to grow sustainable ways of sustaining the earth. So the humans feel that the earth is a kind of a possession that they have. The rock is actually telling you how dispossessed you are about your possession as an earth citizen. That is where the earth I'm mentioning here, the earth is not a virus that would settle into a cohabitative peace with the discovery of a vaccine. And the earth does not need to be thought of as all anthropogenically constructed and consequently dependent solely on human effort for survival and sustenance. We can cut down on plastic and yet cannot be free from this material as it builds its organic and synthetic ties with an erratic and transcendental earth. The virus has its own ties with the earth as much as plastic has its own world geoformations to meet. A majority of us will succumb to plastic death as majority of us are succumbing to viral death. Some mutate with plastic immunity, some with viral immunity, and some post-humanize under internal plastic deposition. That's a new form of plastic post-humanism that I've also spoken about. So the earth plasticizes its deformation, lives out of a decomposition, and finds its exit in what we post-environmentalists loosely qualify as anthropological post-endism. We struggle to keep peace with a wandering planet. And this word planet actually comes from the word planasthai, which means to wander. So the word planet actually comes from this term called planasthai, means to wander. So we struggle to keep pace with this wandering planet. And a plastic earth beyond the human understanding of plastic. We are now into a plastic earth which is beyond the human understanding of plastics. We're not being able to keep pace with the earth anymore. We thought we did in the post-Baconian, almost a draconian, post-Baconian, almost a chauvinistic way of controlling this earth. But our speaking to the plastic rock continues, because we start to speak to the rock, and the rock's conversation with the rock continues on its own. It has always been, in the present continues, believe me. The relentless plastic earth declares a new universal man in this post-enlightenment period, whose evolution, this plastic man's evolution, is in a co-evolution with the material, and whose existence is in a conversation with an ever-changing materiality. So the human today, like the rock, awaits to be born again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. That was wonderful. I mean, completely mind-boggling, a deep discussion that made us think anew. And as expected, we already have questions. I'll take the first question from Shoiko Chakraborty. He says he wants to know, the rock somehow reminds me of Haraway's Chuttu and Shibram's, just a minute, I think I have, yeah. And Shibram's Devotar Janmo, sir. You used a term, junkyard.
I'm sorry. Just a minute. I cannot hear the question. Is it that, can I read the question a little, please?
Yeah. I think that would be nice.
I cannot hear clearly, yeah. If it is a short question, that's fine. But it's a long one, I just cannot hear clearly. That's it.
Sir, it's written down on the chat box.
Yeah, it's there on the chat box.
Oh, really? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I
yes.
already see.
Is this the question, Anuradha Paul? Is it one that you were asking?
No, I was asking Shoiko Chakraborty. You see, 7:56 p.m. The rock somehow.
I will just look at this chat box here. Yeah. Just give me some time, please.
Yeah, of course.
Just a moment.
It's the second question that have appeared.
Okay, the second question, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a way to weigh the fall of causal materials and causal form analysis. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, the terms that Shoiko Chakraborty is using here, I mean, those are very much a part of the materialization that I'm using. I was trying to keep it as free from jargon as I can, because I was just trying to introduce my ways of thinking into it. But yes, to be sure, Haraway is obviously a very easy reliance, because Haraway all the time is talking about this question of staying in trouble. So this staying in trouble of Haraway is something that that comes primarily through, if you are looking at plastic as an environmental problem. I'm not looking plastic here as an environmental problem. The focus of the talk, as well as the focus of the book, is primarily on the object plastic. And so when one looks into the Plasticine and one looks into the understanding of plastic in relation to the ecological catastrophe or ecological mandate, then obviously this relationship starts to begin. where the hero is staying in trouble, or the what was like Tuku theme is something that she comes up with, or many other books that Haraway has written. And also you can talk about the idea of how even Kant, even say manual, they bring things together into a kind of staying in trouble or staying together, like Stuart Kaufman for that matter. But yes, ontogenesis is surely a term that relates to my work that I'm trying to do. Yes, ontogenetically, the plastic rock is building its own identity. But having said that, it is very important for one to be very sure about the terms, because when one uses ontogenesis, then it's important that you also know that how different it is from epigenesis. And it is also very important to know whether ontogenesis has its it can have a kind of affiliation to one would be the biological as well as the media sciences. And ontogenesis can also have its relationship with technology, primarily from Gilbert Simondon. So I think that part is important. But yes, ontogenetically, you can say that the plastic rock, or the rock and the plastic, they have somehow got into a collaborative ontogenetical understanding to produce a plastic rock. Yes, that's possible. Yeah, next question. Should I take it from here?
Yeah, I think you can take it from there. We can take the question
I'm
of
sorry,
Nicholas
the second question by... Yes, and the second question that I'm taking here is the Anthropocene in relation to literature. And, well, this is a huge one. I mean, I think your college is to invite me again for another session of lectures to talk about this, because it looks primarily, it's a huge question. I'm sorry, I can only say that Anthropocene and literature is a whole new industry at this moment, and people are reaping high harvests out of this. So there are lots of books that you can look into. I mean, this talk was primarily on a very specific area of plastic studies. So I would ask you, I will request you to look into the literature there, and I mean, they will have a handbooks on Anthropocene and literature which you can look up. Yes,
Sir, the next
one
question
question
can
here
be
I can
from
see
Anurag
from
Kapal.
yes, PP Mondol. Yes,
Oh,
yes,
P.P.
yes.
Mondal. She has two questions.
I'm reading the question before I answer. Yeah, I can see that. One question
She has
here.
two questions.
Would the interaction of plastic subjectivity and human subjectivity challenge the cohabitability principle and rather problematize the ways in which you make sense of precarity or try to contain? Yes, it does. I mean, I said that to an extent in this talk, and there are more reflections, and there are certainly more discussions on this in the book, because I'm just reading out an excerpt from the book that is coming out next year. This is the material that I'm reading out from. But yes, if you're talking about plastic subjectivity, this is what I have to try to tell you here very clearly, that when one look into the Descartesian ways of looking at how the subjectivity or the subject-object divide can really be produced, and how that subject-object divide starts to get subverted through a new kind of a natural contract that Michel Serres, for that matter, starts to build in, where he tries to overcome the subject-object divide, and the subject-object divide, and how the cohabitability can be mostly about negotiations and mostly about how one starts to live in identity with difference. So this is the part that it is very much there in the book. And yes, when one looks into the subjectivity of the plastic and the subjectivity of the human, if you're looking into that, then more than precarity, I would say the sense of fragility is affected. And I would be more interested in the word fragility rather than precarity, because precarity would be more connected to the environment and literature thing, or the first question which talks about Anthropocene and literature. That's where the precarity would go to. My take would be more on the fragility of, and how fragility has this ability to grow a kind of a man-material connect, That is how man touches the material and how the material touches the man, and how that negotiation starts to work between the two. Yes, that would be my take to this question. Then I see Anuradha Paul asking a question here. If plastic dissipates human subjectivity, then can it also mean that plastic reforms the same subjectivity, since you say that withdrawal from plastic simultaneously may entangle? Yes, yes, it does. Yes, that's a good observation. Yeah, that is exactly what follows from my deliberations, or follows from my argument. That yes, what I'm trying to say, you know, it's something quite. It might just be a little controversial here, but this is something that I want to put out, and there is no harm in actually inviting controversy. You know, when in the Renaissance period, man was born, because man was born with a kind of imagination, and man was born with a kind of almost individual subjectivity to head. Now, this particular man actually got threatened in the modernist period. The post-enlightenment man was a very different man in a way, where modernism starts to threaten this man. And then this man, I would say, died. This particular man died to be reborn as a modern man. And this modern man in the post-war years had its own dilemma, had its own fragmentation, had its own self-incisiveness, had its own, you can call it the kind of self-fragmentation, if you want to put it. But this modern man again starts to get challenged with his own ethics and values, and also the ethos of existence by a postmodern man, where the modern man dies to evolve into a postmodern man. But I would say this postmodern man now starts to get challenged by a plastic man. Now, this plastic man is not the 1960s film where you talk about a plastic man as a man who does nothing. I mean, a man who just about engages with plastic and just stays on with what goes on. It is not that kind of a plastic man. This man is actually dying. The man that you actually had before the plastic and the man that is growing through plastic is a very different man, where plastic acts in its own subjectivity to create a different kind of a man who would actually be born. This is the yet to be born man. I did not say the man is born yet. I would consider this plastic man, as I theorize this, there's a plastic man is actually the yet to be born man. The yet to be born man who will have a very speculative biology to it, not a very evolutionary developmental biology to it, but would have a very speculative biology to it. So that is my response to your question, Anuradha Paul. I have another question here. In an ontological sense, can we therefore understand geodesire to be an extension or a transformation of the precarity that defines modern consumption practices? Does our attempts to negotiate the different materialities in defining the human condition merely signal a loss of human agency? Yeah, I think it does. But the geodesire that I spoke of, you know, that's a nice question from PP Mondal. The geodesire that I'm actually talking about here is definitely a kind of an extension of, as I said, that how do we read our lives in the plastic rock? Because I mentioned that, does the plastic rock becomes a kind of a rock that starts to tell us about our lives? Is it the civilization and its discontents are being scripted across the face of the rock? If it does, then how is it that this plastic rock actually becomes a kind of a metonym as well as a performative for what actually we are heading to? So if you're right that the geodesire and our geodesire can be a way of a reflection of the consumerist desire with which this plastic world is being driven at this moment, and very truly this different materialities that you mentioned, the intermaterialization, both the mineralization and the materialization that I'm talking about, yes, they start to challenge and threaten the human subjectivity. Because I kept on saying, and my book actually very broadly, elaborately details that out, because there is a separate chapter on plastic art where I have worked on art through plastic, how plastic has been used in the kind of producing plastic art. But this is a different kind of art where suddenly like Amanda Biokas would call it the recessive ethics, or the recessive ethics, or the recessive excess that comes up, where suddenly the art starts to be, as I said, a kind of a collector, a kind of an accumulator, a kind of a networker, and starts to build its own ways of doing it. In that case, of course, the human agency, if not terminated, or if not extirpated, the human agency is certainly under suspension to some large extent. Yeah. Should I keep on reading this questions and answer? Is that okay with you?
Of course, that's quite comfortable. I mean, it's comfortable both with you and us.
Yes, that is nicer. Yeah. So there comes another question here, and from Nabonita, which says, I want to understand first if the rock has transformed to a metaphor of life today, and second, if the rock, a thing without life, is to become a material through which we perceive subjectively, then what and how does the meaning of life change? Well, it does actually. It's very much does, because as I said, when I'm dialoguing with this rock, I'm actually trying to not only look at this rock as a kind of an existential testament on how we live, but also I'm actually looking at the metaphor, the rock as a metaphor, metaphorizing our relationship with the material. So it is a way of looking at this, as I said, the objectification used not in the sense of the general sense, as you know, but objectification in the sense of a process. So plastic rock, also can be introduced this way. Plastic rock also starts to tell you not only about itself, but it also starts to tell you about the human, about an external force. And interestingly enough, if there is a plastic matter formed, then all the constituent matters, all the different kinds of matters that go into the making of the rock, human is one such element. I mean, there is suddenly a kind of a challenge to this, almost the transcendental sovereignty of human as being a kind of a determinant or an auditor or an arbiter of producing a work of art or producing anything in nature. That part is definitely challenged. So humans, from being the sovereign arbiter of something happening, this human actually becomes a part of the whole process, or the whole objectification goes on, or the rematerialization that goes on. And this rematerialization is just not a process that happens and ends, but it's a process that continues in the present continuous. So it goes on and on as it moves through. So yes, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Well, again, this question comes from Manush Barik. Well, I know it's a very new concept, which is why I started to play it out on you all. I mean, I play it out on this particular forum, because I just wanted to trigger and probably excite a few passions and imagination in you to think differently about this material. But literature research, yes, it definitely does. I would recommend that you read my essay. It's called Plastic Literature, and where I've introduced a term called plastic literature, and it was published in the University of Toronto Quarterly Journal in 2019. And there is a separate chapter in this book also which talks about plastic literature in great detail. So that's a different kind of literature. It's not a literature on plastic. If you think that I'm talking about only these books and novels and poems that talk about plastic, and so I'm calling it a plastic literature, no, it is not that. It's a very different kind of understanding of plastic literature. I will leave that to you to read, and you're most welcome to get in touch with me just in case you need my response and my feedback. There is a question here. So plastic, is there a part of human existence? Yes, not as part of making essential things, but it's something that gets into humans' physical and mental makeup. Yes, it does. I mean, This is very interesting question, because this is an interesting question for me, because uh, this is the portion that I read out today for you all is a section of a chapter from a last chapter of my book. And there is a section that follows this where I use another term, and that term is called plasticpsychosis. This is a new term that I have again introduced into this whole idea of plastic studies, which I call plasticpsychosis. And when I say plasticpsychosis, then I start to bring psychoanalysis and the whole idea not of plasticity of thinking post-Hegel, or plasticity of thinking like the way the Heidegger, Hegel, or probably Catherine Malabov would be doing with brain studies and the rest of the thing. It's a very different kind of plasticpsychosis that I've introduced, where yes, the mind is affected by the plastic material as much as the body is affected by the plastic material, and how the mind and the body interact, looking at plastic as a kind of a mediator. The material. I'm not talking about plasticity at all. Let me point out that my research so far has not been on plasticity at all. It has completely been on plastic, the material. So yes, that is something you will definitely find as you read my book later. Thank you very much, PP Mondal. Thank you. Yes, I also look forward to you reading my book and letting me know how it reads. Thank you very much. Here's a question from Anita Paul. I found a similarity with the movie Katla, where a copy of a dead man or existing man is coming out of volcanic eruption in the present human time and threatening human subject like the rock is doing after plastic. I'm sorry, I haven't seen this film. Where you have really got me stumped, because I will not be able to answer this because I haven't seen this film at all, and I'm just not someone who actually watches a lot of film, leave alone books. That's the only thing I do. I just read. I haven't actually used this audio visual, so I'm sorry I will not be able to answer this question for you. Well, is plastic time and psychological time? Yeah. And that is there is some similarity definitely between the plastic time and psychological time, because it requires a long discussion, Milan, because when I say the word plastic time, I'm actually trying to compare it with the deep time as well as the geological time, as well as the biological time, and also the human time. So, you know, they call it the humic connect. That is, when you consider this term humic connect, it actually means how these particular times are coming together in the understanding of your existence, which is both the anthropological time, the biological time, the deep time. But yes, the plastic time, what I meant was the material here, definitely the material. I did not actually try to bring in psychoanalysis, which is a part of the chapter, obviously. As I said, I call it the plasticpsychosis. But I'm not using plasticpsychosis here as a term that I introduced, but I'm just about saying that plastic time would be this material time, like the human duration, anthropological duration, and the plastic denudation duration. How that those two times can come together. Because if I'm using something, I am into a used time with that material. But that material has all the time the potency to outlive me. And not only outlive me, but at the same time outdo me. So there is a very strange kind of a connect that starts to build with that material, which is both biological and psychological. Because when I know that this particular material will outlive me, at the same time outdo me, then this psychological quadrant and psychological dimensions comes into my material understanding of that particular material, or my materially embedded understanding of that particular material. So that way, yes, the psychological and the plastic time are connected, which obviously, again, I refer to my book because I didn't have the time to read up, because I don't think a lecture should be nothing more than 60 or 70 minutes, because it's very difficult for anyone to really stay attuned audio-visually to a lecture that goes beyond 1 hour. I already exceeded my limit. I didn't want to talk for 1 or 70. It's always nice to talk, of course, in a conversation. So yes, Milan, thank you for this question. Thank you very much, all of you, for your appreciation of and your patience to listen to this. Plastic materiality and biological plasticity becoming a deciding factor of post-human creativity. Yes, it is. Very relevant question here. I do think that, and that's where I'm going to work on in my next project, is about the plastic post-humanism, because that is where I said plastic post-plasticism. Now, when I use that term post-plasticism here in this lecture, I just wanted to say this, that this post-plasticism is where your bodies, the body that you have now, and yet to possess a body. There are two kinds of bodies now you need to have here. One is the body that you have now, and the yet to be possessed body. The yet to be possessed body is where the plastic ingestion, the plastic infestation, the plastic besetting, the plastic entanglement comes in. And that is a different sort of body that will have a different kind of manifestation and obviously a different kind of space to share. So that particular body will obviously be the body of, as you say, the post-human creativity. And I have worked with a very interesting the artist, plastic artist, and her name is Pinasi Yolgar, and a Turkish artist, and she has this ecosystem of excess, a kind of an understanding of the ecosystem of excess art, and where she's talking about how we can look into the future about different kinds of post-plastic, or you can call it post-human plastic productions can be built. Like, for instance, she calls like plasticeptor, where plasticeptor will be a kind of a digestive organ that humans are going to build over time, that's going to digest plastic. And this plasticeptor will be where you can have also like balloon turtles that are going to come out in the ocean. These balloon turtles are going to just about absorb plastic into their body and would have balloons over the top. So, you know, she produces those kinds of futuristic, speculative things, which is the reason why I say I call this the speculative plastic art, and I term this as a speculative plastic art. This is also very much a part that you were mentioning about the post-humanism part of it. Thank you very much. Yes, and
yeah, I feel that we've had our questions.
I think that's fine.
Today.
Yeah.
And at this end of this whole lecture, we would call upon Professor Shomir Kuila, Department of English, Narajole Raj College, for the formal valedictory. Professor Kuila, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good evening to one and all gathered here. On this wonderful evening, I would like to present the vote of thanks. On behalf of the Department of English, we take this golden opportunity to thank the respected chief guest as well as the eminent speaker of this web lecture series, Sri Ranjan Ghosh, for his hearty response to our appeal in spite of his very busy schedule. We are simply enriched with lots of information by Honorable Sir Sri Ranjan Ghosh, and we shall try our best to invite once again Sir to deliver on the lecture on relationship between literature and plastic rock. Thank you, sir. Now I extend my gratitude and deep respect to the Honorable Principal Dr. Anupam Padua, not only for spending his time with us today, but also for encouraging us to achieve many endeavors. Thank you, sir. I extend my gratitude to Professor Nilanjana Bhattacharya, coordinator of IQAC, for her active support and cooperation. I also extend my great respect and gratitude to the head of the Department of English, Narajole Raj College, Professor Soma Debray, for her overall supervision. Thank you, ma'am. It is my pleasure to thank the dignitaries on and off this platform, not only for participating, but also for guiding us to a prosperous way. Thank you all. Last but not the least, I thank my fellow students for their enthusiastic participation in this web lecture. Without you, this web lecture series would not be a success. Thanks all of you. I sincerely thank all my colleagues, all the non-teaching staffs, all the members of technological subcommittee of Narajole College for glorifying this web lecture series. Without the assistance of the members of the technological subcommittee, this program, this very important web lecture series would not be a successful one. Once again, I thank one and all wholeheartedly. Now, special thanks goes to Mr. Milan Mondol, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Narajole College, uh, for his strenuous actions and cooperation in case of organizing such a wonderful web lecture series, uh, through which all of us can enlarge the boundaries of our knowledge in the upcoming days. So, thank you again. Have a good day. Good night, all of you.
Thank you very much. And before I actually leave out this portal, let me tell you that I have enjoyed talking to all of you here, and also it's been heartening to really see so many questions popping up on the message box here. And there is one word that came up here. I cannot identify the questionnaire here, of course, but it says a lethargic brain, which is a term that gets used there. And I'm particularly attracted to this term, the lethargic brain, because
that was me.
oh, it was you. Oh, it was you. Oh, so wonderful. I like this term. I like this term, lethargic brain. You know, it's very much because what I've seen over the years that we have to ontologically accept our brains to be very lethargic. Believe me, there is always a sort of a predetermined assessment of our brain as being very lethargic, and only a lecture or a session that starts to reduce the lethargy of the brain can be considered to be successful, not anything else. A resource person's CV, profile, or whatever position, whatever that person has is immaterial. What is material, or what really counts as material and substantial, is if your lethargy, the ounce of lethargy in your brain, can be reduced. And if that lecture can reduce some ounce of lethargy, then you know you have done your job very well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's so difficult to find something really new and invigorating, and you've given us that this evening. So
Thank you
the
very
whole
much.
evening got lit up, you know, like firecrackers bursting. Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
very much. Thank you. Thank you. I take your leave. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
sir. Yes, wish everybody else good night, and we are leaving the call. Thank you.